They laughed when she stood in line at the trading post with a busted rifle, 2 worn boots that didn't match, and a list of bullets she couldn't afford. They laughed because she was small, looked frail, and wore her dead husband's coat like it might collapse her spine. They laughed because she had a child clinging to each side and still dared to ask about beaver traps. They laughed because the only thing crueler than the wind in those parts was what men became when winter dragged too long and food ran low. But no one laughed when she came back, because what she dragged behind her was bleeding, still breathing, and not quite human. No one saw her leave the valley that morning, just a cold breath through the willows, a few frost-bitten tracks that didn't match her weight. The blizzard had broken that morning, skies turning brittle blue over snow so hard-packed it echoed like wood when you stepped wrong. Up past the black rock spires that split the range like a frozen jawbone, where old trappers swore the howls didn't come from wolves, she went. No horse, no sled, just her boots, her sack, and a rifle the men of Dead Hollow said would have jammed if she sneezed at it. They joked about it that afternoon by the potbelly stove in the back of the saloon, said maybe she'd last 2 days, maybe 1 if the ridge cats got her scent, but none of them knew about the old map folded in her coat lining, or the snare wire she'd braided with her own hair, or the knot she'd tied into her children's mittens before walking out the door, the kind a mother ties when she knows there's no one else coming back if she doesn't. Her name was Mara, widow of Luke Thorne, who died last spring under a mule cart during the thaw. Some called it an accident. Others remembered the bruises she'd worn all that winter, even when no man had touched her in public. She never cried at the funeral. She never wore black, just patched his coat and started hunting the way he never let her. First it was rabbits, then it was raccoons, lean and stringy but warm. When she started bringing in weasels, the town noticed. When she traded a stack of pelts for flour and didn't say a word, they started whispering. She thinks she's a man, someone scoffed. She'll freeze like the others, muttered another. But what they didn't know, and what the mountain knew, was that Mara didn't hunt like a man. She didn't stalk, didn't chase, didn't waste steps. She waited, listened, studied, took only what she needed and never took twice from the same place. And the mountain gave her back what it gave no one else: direction. She crossed into the North Face Ridge on the 3rd day, alone, past the line where even the trees bent backward like they were trying to escape. There she found tracks, big ones, wrong ones, 2 sets, one heavy and dragging, one too light to carry anything but fear. She followed both. She didn't bring lantern oil, didn't need it. Moonlight was enough when the snow opened wide into what the old Paiute woman once called the White Grave's mouth. Mara had traded with her in better days: dried berries, tobacco, a sharpened awl. The woman told stories that made men laugh and children listen, about the ones who came before the storm, about the breathless shadows that circled camps without sound, about something older than wolves. Mara didn't believe the stories, but she remembered them. So when she found the circle of bones laid like a necklace around the carcass of a bull elk, with no prints nearby and no blood trail out, she knew not to speak. She waited. The wind changed. Then she moved. Back in Dead Hollow, a boy no older than 10 told the sheriff he heard a scream across the ridge that sounded like a man and a broken fiddle string. The sheriff slapped him for lying, but the sound came again the next night, then stopped. No one mentioned Mara. Some assumed she'd died and froze upright somewhere. Others joked she'd married a mountain lion. A few just stopped talking altogether. 4 days later, a figure appeared on the ridge. No horse, no sled, just a woman dragging something through the snow, wrapped in canvas, steam leaking from its sides. They watched her cross the river. Ice cracked, didn't break, she didn't slow. The children saw her first. Her face was grey, lips split, one eye bloodied shut, but she walked like something behind her was heavier than pain. The sheriff met her at the edge of town. He opened his mouth to speak, then saw the shape beneath the canvas shift. "Don't untie it," she said, voice a rasp. He did anyway, and that's when the wind stopped, just went quiet like it too was waiting. The canvas slipped. What lay beneath wasn't a wolf, wasn't a man, had too many scars and too little face, but its eyes were open, and they blinked. She hadn't killed it. She'd brought it back breathing, and it was afraid of her. When the men asked her what it was, she didn't answer. When they asked what she used to catch it, she looked at her hand, bruised purple, fingers raw, and said, "I waited." They locked the creature in the old smokehouse, reinforced it with chains. It didn't speak, just made sounds like rusted hinges and distant thunder. A few recognized the symbols carved into its skin. One old trapper went pale and didn't return. Another tried to stab it through the slats. The blade snapped, and Mara just sat beside the door, every day, silent, watching. They didn't laugh anymore, not because of what she brought back, but because of what she'd become to bring it. And they hadn't even seen what was still following her. They bolted the smokehouse shut before before nightfall, barred it with timber thicker than a man's thigh, and dragged the blacksmith's iron from his forge to fasten the door with heat-sealed clamps. The thing didn't scream. It didn't try to break free. It just sat inside and made sounds like a whetstone. Grinding bone, and still Mara didn't flinch. 3 days passed, and the thing inside didn't die. The air around the smokehouse turned still and cold, like the woods during a snow hush. Children who played near it caught fevers. Dogs refused to pass by, and Mara sat outside through it all, wrapped in that patched old coat, cheeks burned from frost and wind, a bloodshot gaze locked on nothing. She said nothing, ate nothing, and when old Sheriff Jarrow brought her a coffee in a tin mug, she didn't even blink at the steam curling toward her face, just sipped it slow, as if her body no longer cared if it burned or froze. He asked again, quieter this time. "What in God's name is that thing, Mara?" Her voice came out hoarse, but not trembling. "Not God's." They didn't dare open it again, not even after the groaning stopped, not even after the clanging did, not even after the thing went completely, terribly still for a whole night and half the next day. That quiet scared them more than the noises ever did, because men like those didn't fear a fight, they feared what didn't need one, and what terrified them most wasn't the thing in the shack, it was that she'd survived it. Some started saying she'd made a deal, others whispered she'd been the bait for something worse. One drunk in the saloon called her not natural, and then refused to meet her eyes when she walked past him an hour later, trailing snow and silence behind her. She didn't answer the rumors. She didn't try to defend herself. She just sat outside the smokehouse, fingers bandaged and raw, watching the door like it might unlock again on its own, and not from this side. The only person who still spoke to her was her youngest, Ella, who came each dawn with 2 biscuits and a blanket. Mara never took the blanket, just broke the biscuits in half and gave one back. On the 4th night, a fire started near the old mill. It wasn't much at first, just smoke, but then the flames caught the dry roof and leapt high and wild, so sudden the bell hadn't even rung before half the street glowed orange. The men rushed with buckets and rags, shouting orders and curses, slipping over ice and soot, and in the chaos no one watched the smokehouse. When they finally turned back, they saw the door open, no chains broken, no bolts wrenched free, just open. No one saw what came out, no one saw who opened it, but Mara was gone. At first they searched, rifles drawn, boots crunching over hard snow, calls echoing like ghost howls through the trees. But by morning, they found nothing. No tracks, no blood, not even her blanket where she used to sit. Just a patch of snow melted in a perfect circle, like something had stood there radiating heat. That's when the real fear set in, because men who used to laugh now locked their doors during daylight. They told their wives not to ask questions. They put out extra meat for dogs that wouldn't bark. They didn't speak her name, didn't tell their children about her. They pretended she never existed. But fear doesn't vanish because you pretend, and Mara had not vanished, not truly, because out past the ridge, where the snows tangled through the pine like fingers, a fresh trail had formed, not from sleds, not from boots, but from something dragged, something heavy and wet and breathing. There were blood drops along the path, too dark for elk, too thick for man, and the wind that followed it blew backward against the trees. It wasn't Mara dragging the thing now, it was the thing dragging her, or so they thought, until a trapper came back from the North Ridge one dawn, half dead and raving about the woman with no shadow, said he saw her standing in the mouth of a cave, speaking to something that shouldn't speak back, claimed she looked at him, and the thing looked at him through her. They found his body in the creek 2 days later. No wounds, no frostbite, just his eyes frozen open like he'd never closed them, and that should have been the end. But then the livestock started vanishing. First a goat, then a dog, then a steer that had been chained inside a barn. No blood, no tracks, just ropes snapped clean and doors left wide open. By the time the town held a vote to ride out and track what they feared most, a snowstorm came down so brutal it cracked fence rails like twigs. The search never left town. Only one man dared to go out, Caleb Brewer, youngest of the lot, fresh from Missouri and still full of something like pride. He said he didn't believe in ghost stories, said he didn't fear a woman with no husband and less sense. They handed him a lantern and a horse. He didn't make it past the creek bend. The horse came back without him, no saddle, just a torn blanket soaked in something black. That was the same night the church bell rang without a hand to pull it. And then Mara came back again. She didn't knock. She didn't drag anything this time. She just walked into the saloon where 5 men had sworn last spring she'd die alone before winter ended, and stood silent at the bar. The place went still. No music, no laughter, just boots creaking against worn floor. She looked worse than before, gaunt, hollowed, but not weak. And when Sheriff Jarrow asked her, real slow, real gentle, why she was here here, she said. It's following me, but it ain't after me. She pulled a small bundle from her coat, laid it on the bar, unwrapped it. Hair, human, blonde, braided like a child's. That's when they remembered Ella, and the fear turned. Because now it wasn't just about Mara. It was about what she'd led here, and what she might have traded. The preacher said it was the devil. The blacksmith swore it was a skinwalker. The old Paiute woman, the one with stories in her teeth, only said this: there are things in those hills that don't take souls. They take what loves them, because that's the only thing they can wear. Mara didn't explain what she meant, just walked out the back door of the saloon and into the dark again, rifle over her shoulder, as if she wasn't hunting, but waiting. They didn't stop her, not because they trusted her, but because something in their bones knew she wasn't coming back empty-handed. She never had, but none of them were ready for what she'd bring back next. The trail that wound out of Dead Hollow that next morning was not wide nor clear, but every settler who passed the windows of the sheriff's office or peeked from behind their frost-bitten curtains could see it. Straight down the center of town, like a river had split the snow. No boot tracks, no sled ruts, just something long, pressed deep, dragged steady, as if a body had been pulled backward through the storm without struggle. The sheriff didn't follow it, neither did the preacher, not even when old Tanner Bixby swore he'd seen a pair of glowing eyes outside his barn that night and found all his chickens lined up dead by morning, their heads untouched, their feet neatly tucked. Instead, they nailed their windows shut. Instead, they whispered Mara's name with a wince, like the syllables might curse the tongue that spoke them too loud. But one man didn't hide. One man packed his saddlebags before dawn, boiled a single egg, and loaded his rifle slow as if going out for deer. His name was Emmett Crow, once a Pinkerton tracker, once a man who'd lived 3 months in the Utah canyons, hunting a fugitive so clever even his shadow had a decoy. He'd retired to Dead Hollow after a bullet tore his leg sideways during a standoff. Said he wanted quiet, said he'd put down his badge, but he kept the rifle and the hat, and when he saw Mara leave the town again, he followed. Didn't tell no one, didn't write a note, just vanished behind her. And in that gap, those 3 days when she was gone again, the hollow changed. The dogs started barking at nothing, but only in unison, only when the sky went still and the firewood popped without heat. The preacher's wife hung herself in the bell tower, but there was no rope, just the bell clanging like mad until they found her floating somehow in the rafters, eyes wide, arms stretched as if she'd been lifted by wind. No one spoke of it. They couldn't afford to, because that same night, Ella came back, alone, barefoot, no coat. She didn't cry, she didn't tremble. She walked into town like she'd been there the whole time, face so calm, it scared the children who knew her best. Her dress was torn, her hands were clean. Sheriff Jarrow took her in, sat her by the stove, asked her where she'd been. She didn't answer right away. She pointed to the kettle, asked for tea, and when he brought it, she said, "Ma said not to come back till I'd learned how to see without eyes." He blinked at that, thought maybe she was sleepwalking, or worse. But her gaze, unblinking, flat, made his spine twitch. "See what?" he asked. Her eyes found his, pale, too still for a child. They searched the town twice that day, asked every settler if they'd seen Mara, if they'd seen Emmett, if they'd heard horses, or hooves, or shouts. The snow told nothing. The sky stayed shut. That's when the Paiute woman came again. This time she walked right into the church. She didn't kneel, didn't look at the cross. She stood beneath the altar and said one word: hollow. The preacher tried to drive her out, told her not to speak in riddles. But the townsfolk were listening now, listening because she was the only one who spoke straight, even when her words bent sideways. She said there were old places beneath the range, before cabins, before trails, before men, places where something had slept for longer than names had meaning, things without form but not without need. And when men hunted wrong, when they took without thanks, when they cut into the belly of the land and left it bleeding, they woke it, and it didn't kill. It became. That's what she said. It becomes what you bury in it. The church emptied fast. No one said a word, but all of them, every man who'd mocked Mara, every woman who'd eyed her with pity, every child who'd laughed when she tried to trade pelts, remembered something they buried, a brother, a baby, a part of themselves. The mountain was full of graves, and now something was walking in their stead. That night the sky split, not with thunder, with light, but not warm, not gold, a thin vertical flare of white that seared the ridge like a bone pushed through skin. It came and went, just once, and then Emmett returned, not on horseback, not walking. They found him at dawn, seated against the town well, rifle laid across his knees, boots missing, eyes open, hands burned black, alive, just barely. They pulled him inside, wrapped him in everything they had, furs, quilts, words. But his jaw didn't work. His hands shook, not from cold, from memory. They waited. He spoke 3 hours later, in a voice not his own. "She's gone?" "Who?" they asked. "Mara, what happened?" He looked at them like he wasn't sure they were real. "She went inside." "Inside what?" He shook his head. "Not what? Who?" It took hours to pull the story from him. He stammered, frothed, went silent. But the pieces fit. He'd tracked her through the pine, up into the mouth of a canyon, so narrow no horse could fit. She walked without fear, without pause, as if being led. She never looked back. The tracks ended at a pool, frozen, still, surrounded by old stones shaped like ribs. She knelt, touched the ice. It cracked. Something rose from it, not fast, not loud, just inevitable, and it looked like her husband, not dead, not bruised, smiling. He said she didn't scream, she embraced it, and they sank together. The pool froze behind them. Emmett fired once. The shot didn't echo. Then something whispered his name, and he ran, but not before seeing the thing shift, not before seeing its smile twist sideways, not before realizing it hadn't taken her, she'd taken it, and now she was it. Back in town, the sheriff locked the church doors, told the people to stay inside, told them to pray, but the preacher was already gone, left his collar on the pulpit and fled east. No one followed, because east was where the trail returned. Again, that same dragging line, that same absence of sound, and when the children peeked from under quilts, when the dogs began to yelp and the firewood hissed like snakes, they saw her, Mara, walking alone, toward the well, toward the heart of Dead Hollow. She didn't blink, she didn't limp, and her face was smiling, but not with joy, with recognition, as if she'd finally arrived where she'd always been going, as if the whole town had been walking toward her, not the other way around. And behind her, the snow followed, not falling, rising. The snow behind her didn't drift, didn't swirl, didn't fall like weather. It pulled, it curled inward like smoke in reverse, folding into the long track she left as she walked down the center of town. One steady footfall after another, crunchless, weightless, as if gravity itself stepped aside to let her pass. The trail drew closed behind her with each step, sealing the earth in silence, until it looked like no one had ever walked there at all. But they saw her, the widows clutching their rosaries in shuttered cabins, the drunks peering through frost-fogged windows, the children who peeked from beneath floorboards, not understanding the weight in the air but feeling their breath catch like birds frozen mid-flight. And Ella, her daughter, her blood, sat inside the sheriff's house, rocking gently in the chair by the fire, smiling faintly at the door, as if she'd known all along this moment would come. "Mama's home," she whispered. No one moved to greet her. Not the sheriff, not the blacksmith, not even old Deke, who once tried to court Mara when she was 15 and wild-eyed, and still new to this unforgiving place. They'd all seen her before. They'd seen the bruises her husband left, the stoop of her back from carrying wood, water, silence. They'd seen her cry when she thought no one watched, then watched her stop crying altogether. But none of them had seen her like this. She wasn't just different. She wasn't just changed. She wasn't Mara anymore, but she wore Mara's face. And behind her, just outside the ring of cracked fence posts and frozen wells, the wind held still like breath before the scream, and something moved in it. Not a form, not yet, but an intention, like a ripple beneath the ice, building, waiting. Sheriff Jarrow stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand, face pale and tight. "Mara," he said, though the name felt false on his tongue now, like calling a flame by the name of the match that sparked it. She looked up, not startled, just amused, like she'd been waiting for someone to finally speak. "Sheriff," she said, her voice smooth as lake water, as if her throat had never known cold or strain. He swallowed, lowered the barrel slightly. "What are you?" She tilted her head, and something about the gesture, the slowness, the grace, made the sky darker. "I am what you made me," she said. He blinked. "Mara never wanted revenge." She stepped forward. "And yet she earned it." The snow didn't crunch beneath her feet. It exhaled. Behind her, the wind picked up, whispered now, but not words. Shapes, syllables without language, threading through the pine, around rooftops, under doors. The dogs began to howl again. One ran straight into the river and didn't come back up. Jarrow stepped down off the porch. "You can't be here," he said, voice trembling now. She smiled wider. "And yet I am." He lifted the shotgun. Her hand didn't move, her body didn't flinch, but the gun cracked in half. Not with a bang, not with heat. It just folded, metal soft as bark, drooping like wax in a flame, until it dripped from his fingers useless. He fell backward, not from impact but from the cold, not the cold of weather, the cold of absence, the cold of consequence. She stepped past him without a glance, and the sheriff of Dead Hollow, who'd once shot a rustler dead at 40 yards without blinking, curled into the snow like a child and did not rise again. Inside the blacksmith's shop, lanterns blew out without wind. Inside the church, the crucifix twisted upside down. Inside the saloon, the glasses cracked one by one, until only silence remained. She walked through it all, not destroying, just unmaking. And when she reached the well, the center of the hollow, the oldest piece of it, dug with bare hands and too much pride, she stopped. She looked down, not into the well, but into the memory of it. This was where her husband had shoved her the first time she disobeyed, where she'd lost their first child, where no one had come when she screamed. She stared for a long while, and then she said, low and even, "This is what you fed the land." And something answered, not aloud, but the ground breathed, the well rumbled, and the town shifted, like roots turning in their sleep. From the north, a shape rose through the snow, not towering, not massive, but impossible. It wore no face, it had no arms, but it bent the trees as it passed, left no print, and when it neared, the air grew so thick with cold that fire stopped burning. People screamed, they tried to run, but the snow wouldn't let them. It rose against their legs like hands, dragged, held, pulled them gently, firmly, back into stillness. They could not scream long. Their voices vanished like mist. The preacher who'd fled east tried to gallop back when he saw the light. They found his horse the next morning. No hoofprints, no saddle, no man, just a Bible open to blank pages, flapping softly in. Wind that didn't blow. And Mara, she watched. She did not command. She did not warn. She simply was. Whatever the thing was that followed her, whether it was the mountain's justice, the land's memory, or her own grief hardened into shape, it obeyed the absence inside her, and it did not ask permission. It moved through the town like fog, and where it passed, people forgot. Not everything, just enough. They forgot how to look her in the eye. They forgot what they'd said that day in the trading post when her rifle jammed. They forgot the laughter, but she didn't. She remembered all of it, and she would not let them bury that. When dawn finally came, it didn't rise. It seeped, gray, colorless, quiet. Dead Hollow was still there. Cabins still stood. Livestock still shuffled. But something had gone out of it. Something had been taken. And the people left behind? They didn't speak of Mara anymore. They didn't speak much at all. But sometimes, when the wind circled the ridge just right, and the sky blinked with that thin white light that didn't come from the sun, they heard a voice. Not loud, not far, just close enough to feel. And it said, "You don't bury what you hate. You bury what you fear." And that's why the Hollow never dug graves again. That winter, no one in Dead Hollow died. Not officially, not in the ledgers, not in the records kept by the circuit judge who made his rounds twice a year, scribbling names of births and burials, of marriages and misfortunes into his cracked, leather-bound book. When he arrived in the thaw, tired and frostbitten, he found a town intact, weathered, thinned but upright. Roofs were still standing, fires still burned, livestock lowed and goats muled, and smoke curled up from chimneys. To his eye, it was survival. But the people were not the same. They answered questions too fast, or not at all. They avoided mirrors. They salted their doorsteps at night, not against wolves, but against something unnamed. No one said Mara's name. No one remembered the blacksmith's wife's screams when the bells rang at midnight. No one explained why the well had been boarded over, and the ground around it sunk like a lung deflated. And when the judge asked about Sheriff Jarrow, they pointed to a plot behind the church, freshly shoveled and oddly square, but no headstone stood there, and no cross. He pressed, a little, just enough to feel that crack in the air, like stepping onto ice too early in the thaw. Then he left, and he never returned, even in good weather. Because some part of him, some quiet animal part, understood what the eyes of Dead Hollow's people told him. The woman had not gone, she had become. They say she still walks the woods beyond the pine brake, where the frost climbs the trees higher than sunlight ever touches. That if you head north with bad intent, if you drag your past behind you like a mule cart of shame, the snow turns heavy, turns strange, turns against you. And if you keep walking, you find the ridge, and then the stone-lined pool, and then, if you're honest, you see her, not as she was, not as she is, but as she makes you. They say she doesn't speak at first. She listens, because that's all she ever did. Listened to the blows that landed in silence, to the laughter she wasn't allowed to answer, to the pain she folded away to keep her children fed. She listened while the town made her less, while men named her weakness, and women judged her grief, while she hunted alone through woods that had no love for the meek, and carved warmth out of meat no one else would touch. And then, when the silence finally thickened into shape, when the land itself heard her too, she stopped listening. She spoke. Now, those who come to find her, men trying to prove a legend, trappers looking to sell bones, drifters thinking she's just another wild woman, don't always return, but sometimes they do. And when they do, they're never quite right. One came back smiling, all his teeth gone, and swore he'd spoken to his dead mother. Another came back with his boots full of water, and no memory of how they'd gotten there. A third tried to set fire to the church, shouting that the floorboards whispered at night. They hanged him, but even as he swung, his smile didn't fade. They buried him without a name, just in case, because names carry weight in Dead Hollow now. Names like Mara, names like Thorn, names like Crow, Emmett Crow, who lived but never spoke again, and spent every dawn staring northward with a rifle across his knees, not guarding against what might come, but waiting for what he knew would return. Because one night, a year after the snow turned strange, Emmett vanished. No struggle, no blood, just gone, and in his place, a single braid of red hair, left on the porch, wrapped in birch bark, still warm. They said nothing, not aloud, but a few women placed stones outside their doors, and a few men began hanging old snares in trees, open, unbaited, like apologies. Because whatever came down that mountain, it did not forget, and it did not forgive. It simply returned, over and over. Each winter the snow turns unnatural by mid-December. The frost doesn't crunch, it sighs. The pine needles drip even when there's no melt. And sometimes, in the space between breath and thought, you can hear footsteps in the hush, pacing just beyond the line of sight. People who move into the hollow now are told the stories. Not all of them, but just enough. They're told not to dig too deep, not to hunt too far, and never, never to leave a woman behind. Not in the woods, not in the cold, not in silence. Because silence is a place now, a place with eyes and hands and memory. They say you can still see her sometimes, on the edge of morning light, where the shadows haven't fully fled. She stands at the edge of the trees, coat torn, face pale, a child's mittens still tied to her belt. Her gaze is not cruel, just knowing. She does not raise her rifle. She does not wave. She waits. And if you speak, if you dare say her name, the wind stops, just long enough to hear your own heartbeat. And then the trees bend forward, not from the wind, from her. And if you run, if you try to unmake the path you walked, the snow closes behind you, and you are not followed, because she is not chasing. She is choosing. She is choosing who she'll bring back next, and whether they'll return at all. Dead Hollow is still there, still marked on the maps, still passed by riders too stubborn to learn and too proud to ask. But no one stays long, and no one asks what happened to the woman they once called weak, because somewhere beneath all that ice, the land still remembers what it became when she fed it her pain, and it is still hungry,